Big Nose George was an outlaw in the 1800s who got turned into a pair of shoes. Yup, you heard that right. Big Nose George, given the most uncreative nickname in history, although ironically was born with the name George Parrott, was a notorious outlaw in the 1870s. In 1878 in Wyoming, Big Nose and his gang attempted to rob a train, and they failed miserably. The local sheriff and detective decided to hunt down this gang that had failed to rob their train, and followed Big Nose and the rest of the gang to Rattlesnake Canyon. But the gang realized they were coming and hid in some bushes. Although I can only imagine Big Nose wasn't hid too well. I can just see that nose sticking out of the bushes, hairs gently rustling in the wind. Once the officers arrived at the camp and realized that the fire was still hot, the outlaws ambushed them. The sheriff immediately took a bullet to the face, and the detective was able to run a little bit, almost got out of the valley to freedom, but he was shot down before he could get out. The gang then stripped the bodies, took one of the horses, and fled. And once the lawmen's bodies were found, a bounty was put on each gang member's head for $20,000, which is the equivalent of about $500,000 today. Several of the other gang members were either captured or killed over the next year. But good old, most easily recognizable person in the world, Big Nose George, made it all the way to Montana, where he went to a saloon, immediately got drunk, and boasted to everyone in the saloon about what he had done. Unsurprisingly, an angry mob formed, grabbed Big Nose, and dragged him out to a tree to hang him right then and there. Big Nose somehow, and I can only assume it was by promising to pinky swear or something like that, convinced the people to let him go so he could return to Wyoming and stand trial. They let him go, and he actually went back to Wyoming to stand trial. And at the trial, he was sentenced to death by hanging. During his jail time, he did attempt to escape once, got in a fight with the jailer. The jailer cracked his skull during the scuffle, but Big Nose just kept on coming and almost made it out until a woman named Mrs. Rankin brought a loaded gun in, held Big Nose at gunpoint, and forced him back into his cell. The news of his attempted escape got out, and yet another angry mob formed. There were a lot of angry mobs in the Wild West. They stormed the prison, dragged Big Nose out, took him to a tree to hang him, failed miserably at hanging him twice. Apparently they couldn't figure out how to tie a knot, and on the third time finally successfully hung Big Nose George. Since Big Nose had no family and all his friends were either dead or captured, nobody claimed his body. So the local doctor decided to use it as a science experiment. First thing, as was the custom in those days, the doctor made a death mask from plaster of Paris, and it had no ears because Big Nose had struggled so much during the hanging that his ears had been torn off. And then this mad scientist doctor cut off Big Nose's head because he wanted to study his brain to see if the brain of a criminal was different from that of a non-criminal. This is gonna be gross. I'm warning you right now. And then he peeled the skin off of Big Nose's chest and thighs and then sent them to the tanner with instructions to turn them into a pair of shoes and a medicine bag. And he gave weirdly specific instruction that he wanted the nipples to be visible on the shoes. When the shoes finally came back, he was disappointed that the nips were not visible, but they still became his favorite pair of shoes anyway. Lack of nips and all. And the weirdness did not end there. This doctor continued to experiment on Big Nose's body for the next year, preserving it in a whiskey barrel full of salt solution. He sent the skull cap to a woman named Miss Heath, who became the very first female doctor in Wyoming. And she, apparently equally as insane, used the skull cap as an ashtray at the front door of her office. I mean, a doctor promoting smoking is just irresponsible. When the doctor was finally done with all of his evil experiments, he finally had what was left of Big Nose's body stuffed into the whiskey barrel and buried. By the way, Dr. Osborne, the one who did all of these crazy experiments, was elected the very first Democratic governor of the state of Wyoming, and he wore the skin shoes to his inauguration. This explains so much about Wyoming. And also became the Assistant Secretary of State under President Wilson. Decades later, in 1950, a construction crew was working on a building in that area and excavated by accident the whiskey barrel full of Big Nose's remains. When they discovered the remains, the more decent, or the people in the 1980s would have said the softer people of the 1950s, thought that Big George should have at least had a humane burial. Dr. Heath was still alive, she was an older woman by then, still had the skull cap, and sent it to Wyoming so that it could be buried with the rest of the body. Of course, the people of Wyoming were like, we can't bury that. People gotta see this. So while they did bury the scraps of Big Nose's body, the Carbon County Museum of Rawlins, Wyoming now currently has the skin shoes, the ashtray skull cap, and the death mask, all available for the public to see. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.